Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the CSFL Kickoff Show podcast. It is obviously myself, Coach Fury, here on the channel. But today we've got a bit of a special episode. We're not talking about necessarily about teams, about the league, about the draft, about the off season. We're sort of taking a step back today, and we're going to be talking to one GM who's been in the league for a little while now. Started in a really interesting situation and has really progressed through that, and we're going to sort of go down a bit of memory lane and just find out a little bit more about Stuart, the current Rams GM, and everyone known as the Bengals GM from previous pasts in the CSFL. Stuart, it's great to have you on one of these shows. Thank you very much for joining us, and I'm really excited to actually talk a little bit about the Bengals and about the Rams and about your background and sort of history with Draft Day Sports Pro Football. I guess first thing to sort of ask is, are you excited for this off season? Are you ready? Are you sort of building up the anticipation with how the season's gone?
Well, the off season's it's a little weird because I don't have a top 20 draft pick, which I had twice, obviously, with the Bengals, and so I'm kind of curious what I'm going to do. I haven't really figured it out yet with a pick that's in the bottom 12, with the Rams team that is I've built around Bridgewater, obviously, but is probably less than optimal on a number of different levels. So I'm really curious to see how that draft is going to pan out for me because I definitely see some holes on the team and some things I'd like to improve. And some of my better players have left on or leaving on 1 year. They were 1 year left, and so with 31,000 or so to play with, it's going to be interesting to see what I can do with all of that.
Yeah, and absolutely. I think we'll come back and talk a little bit about the Rams in the off season, but interested to get your thoughts up front. And I guess first, it's worth saying congratulations on winning Coach of the Year this year in the awards. Unanimously, pretty much, with all 32 GMs voting. So I guess that's quite a sort of peak of the accomplishment from where you started with the Bengals. And just wanted to say congratulations on that before we maybe talk about a little bit of the history of you as a GM to date.
Well, it is always it's very nice to be recognized. I mean, it's really an honor to have gotten the award, and quite frankly, considering how many great GMs there are in this league. I mean, there's yourself, there's obviously I always had to battle against the Ravens, and we have in the Cowboys, and just so many other great GMs out there. To get this obviously is very meaningful, and obvious. I think to beat all those other people out, I'll take it. I think we had a couple of good seasons, but I appreciate the recognition from everybody.
Yeah, absolutely, and thoroughly deserved, Stuart, I have to say. So before we sort of talk a little bit about the Bengals' history, and I know we've talked in many times about the ups and downs and the thought process in terms of getting that team transition from a team that was really struggling with cap challenges to where they are now, and then obviously the Rams. I just would really be interested in maybe just taking a step back from that and just understanding a little bit about how you kind of ended up down the rabbit hole of American football sims, leagues, etc. How did you kind of find that to begin with, and then what sort of made you go from finding that fantastic thing that we all enjoy to joining some multiplayer leagues like the CSFL?
Well, it was quite an accident, actually. I have a buddy who's named Aaron Banks. You might see him around as Van the Red in college and such. And he would, we've known each other. Oh gosh, probably something in the neighborhood of 10 years. Never met. I mean, we've known each other through um, various writing simulations and fan fiction and such. And then he invited me years ago into a hockey simulation league that is online, and I won a Stanley Cup there. or what I call it, the Cyber Cup there, off a very old system. And I still play in that. I don't do as much with the team because, quite frankly, I've been getting bored. The league's gotten a little easy for me, and so a lot of the he quit the league about 2-3 years back, and he says, hey, I found this these leagues. I'm still simming, and I'm doing it in football. He says, you interested? And I said, of course I'm interested. I love football. And the next thing I knew, he gave me the Wolverine links, and he had told me about the uh, CSFL, which was then also a college league as well. And he was in the college version. So I bought both the college version and I bought the pro football version because I enjoy pro football as well. And he got me into the college version, and he says you should play, some of the games on your own just to kind of figure it out. And so literally, I took a night or two and ran through some self play games and figured out some things that I could do, figured out some things I couldn't, and there was an opening for the Bengals, which was the only team that was available in the CSFL. I said, not knowing what I was getting into, sure, I'll take the team.
So,
And that's how I got here.
yeah, that's really interesting, and I think we all share similar kind of stories in that it's either a friend or through something that you end up sort of in this track. And I mean, it's great to hear that sort of word of mouth and just general conversation still keeps people engaged with the simulation league, etc. But I guess interesting. Moving on from that, you said, "Oh, hey, I'll just take the Bengals." What was the difference between your initial thought of taking the Bengals and then when you actually landed on the team and started to understand a bit of the league dynamics, the financials of the league? Uh, where did you sort of begin in that position? Because I know that for other new GMs who maybe join and take a team, I'm guessing there's a bit of a learning curve period in terms of understanding that it's not necessarily just about getting players and fit, but also really understanding the other dynamics that come with it, like the financials and interacting with other GMs who are also trying to win, also trying to put the best team on the field.
Well, for me, it was a lot of learning on the fly. And the good news for myself is that I'm adaptable and I listen and I watch and um, quite frankly, was looking in the Discord, and I would, pick up certain things. I go to the Wolverine websites and look at all the previous articles of how to be successful and what the previous uh, or how perhaps things like overall didn't mean as much as I originally might have thought it was, and to key on certain abilities and such. And I spent probably the first 2 weeks because I came in just after the draft had concluded. I probably spent the first 2 weeks just reading. I mean, reading everything I could get my hands on, looking at every possible strategy that there was and just trying to improve myself. And I took some of that and tested it again in the single player modes, and kind of came up with some things that were working for me and said, well, let's see how it works in a multiplayer game. I know that one of the things I was particularly concerned about was the salary, because just like in the NFL, you can only afford so much. You can't spend it all on, one or two star players, because if you do, you're going to have, well, crap for the rest of your team. So the question is how to balance, or at least for me, was how to balance getting some average plus players and keep their salaries adjusted. And when I took over the team, oh my God, the first thing I had to do was, I could see that the team was bad, and I had been warned in advance how bad the team was, but I didn't. Maybe if I had known really how bad the team was when I took it over, I might not have done it.
So just talk us through that then. What were the big standout things that you look back on now and go, oh my goodness me, I had to deal with this situation or this salary or this weakness on the team. What were sort of the big ones that stand out for you now looking back?
Well, I mean, the contracts were severely bloated on a few players, and some of those players, I really couldn't understand why the salaries were spent the way they were, and I had made the decision of anyone that was like had 2 years or left on the contract. I was just cutting out bad salaries pretty much immediately. If I couldn't deal them, I was cutting them, releasing them, and just saying we'll take the 20% hit. And I looked at the Bengals and said this is a 3-year project to get them to the playoffs. And quite frankly, it turns out I was right. Although they didn't quite get there this year, I'm a little disappointed in that. But it was a 3-year project, so I took and I cut um, immediately anyone that was worthless, at least in my opinion, or too high of a contract, so that I could immediately make some salary cap room to get myself some availability for the future. And I think by the time I was through, I can't remember. I had something like 20 million left for that first year, and I ended up getting some free agents kind of tied me over. Um, I also traded Carlton Palmer or Carson Palmer for a third round and a fifth round because I knew I wasn't competing that year, and he was a decent quarterback, and I wasn't going to get anything out of him. So again, the whole idea was to build a bit more through the draft and to reduce salaries wherever possible. And I was under the mistaken impression that we also had to have a full roster. So I'm looking at having 58 people and trying to spread it across. And so I was doing a balancing act with that as well.
Yeah, and I think that's some really useful and interesting insight into some of the challenges that come along with a team. I mean, if there's a team like the Bengals, I remember saying to many people it was just the worst situation of all of the teams left. I mean, it was one of the pretty difficult ones in the sense that, as you said, the cap considerations were just terrible. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean it's something like 30 or 35% of the team's entire salary cap were taken up with 2 safety players or something crazy, something crazy like that. But
if I recall, and again, I did so much changing in that first and second year. I recall it was there was 2 tackles. There was it was one free safety who had like a 10 million wrapped up in him. And I want to say there was one corner as well, but about half 50 50 million or 60 million was wrapped up in like 4 players. It was bad.
yeah, I mean, I think it was. So then obviously you took them over. You managed to restructure some of the salary issues, and as you said, move some players on, etc. If you can cast your mind back to that first season, I've got sort of the season recaps up here. I think you took over. Was it around about the 2015 season? Am I correct in thinking that?
Yeah, I had taken over. So we just finished 2017, right? So
Yeah,
it
yeah,
took over 2015 on free agent
yeah.
round 6 or 7.
Yeah, so just I've got it up on the screen. The 2014 season, the Bengals
Oh, that's
finished.
what it was. I also had oh my god, I had defensive ends. Oh my god, I had like 7. The
Yeah,
computer drafted 7 or 8 defensive ends, and
yeah.
they were all miserable. They were all terrible.
I mean, it was a really bad situation, and I mean, the Bengals in 2014 were 5-10, and then you obviously something kind of worked okay for you because you took the team to 8-8 in the first season, and I guess that must have been a really great achievement. Thinking that you've just stepped into a league, you're just finding out about the game, you're learning about it, you're making changes a little bit on the fly, as you said, to sort of come into any league and turn around a team and win, go 0.500 is fantastic. I guess. What were your thoughts from that perspective at that point?
I was elated. I mean, 8-8 with the Bengals, which was the highest record they had ever achieved. I was in the last 3 or 4 weeks. I went 3-1. I think it was in the last 4 weeks of that season. I had also beaten the Ravens at some point, and from what I could see, I mean, I got a little help from Stoney here towards the end of the season, because one of the things that I was doing is I was trying to play the game like a football game, so I had things structured for first down and second down and a certain set of plays for each set of downs, figuring that the computer system, such as it was built, would take those things into consideration. And obviously, it doesn't seem to care. So it's not as savvy as about the game as perhaps all of us as real people are. And that was an adjustment in that was made in the last 5-6 games of the season, was more catering to certain plays regardless of down and situation.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that's a great tip that you just shared there for anyone who kind of listens back on this. And granted that I think we were in maybe Draft Day Sports 20 at the time. I think possibly 21 at that point. I'm not sure, but there are aspects of real life football that clearly are not going to work here. Some of that micro detail that you see on a Sunday evening is not going to be right here, and it's about finding that balance. And as you said, once you find that balance between some of the stuff that probably would work in real life that won't work here, and some stuff that does work in the engine that maybe doesn't work as well in real life, getting that balance right is so key. But I mean, it was great to see the Bengals go 8-8 in sort of your first season. And then obviously we get to next year, where we kind of have a little bit of a step back. I think it's fair to say, going to sort of 6-9-1. I guess you had an off season then, a full off season through. What were sort of the next sort of stages and challenges you were thinking, not just from the GMing side, but probably from the coaching side, to try and keep this team moving? You said you had a great win against the Ravens there in your first season as well. How did you kind of try and take that learning and sort of build it into the next season? And what do you feel kind of went well, didn't go well? What in terms of thinking about what you might want to change if you were doing that situation again?
What I didn't know, and let me go look at the Bengals, because the team has, while it's changed a little, it hasn't changed much from when I had it. One of the I played oh God, what was his name? Who was the quarterback I used in 15? I barely remember all of a sudden. But in 17, I was trying to develop Stephen Morris, and I knew that 2016 was going to be a throwaway season. Of course, again, I didn't really anticipate that I was going to do much that season. I didn't really have high hopes, for the team. Still, I was still rebuilding. I was still, dealing with some salary issues. And so I was just trying to, get. I was hoping maybe a 9-7 year. I had some injuries, if I recall, that were kind of early on in the season, pretty harsh. And my entire hope that season was really to develop Stephen Morris, because I didn't see a lot of hope in my quarterback situation. My quarterbacks were mediocre compared to the rest of the league, and so I was trying to develop him. And what I noticed very early on for whatever reason, and still seems to be the case, is that he was not developing at all game to game, and in terms of his player skill. And so while he had, an arm of 85, which is reasonable, and accuracy is 79, and his intelligence being a little low at 71, it's still, not, terrible. But I mean, I looked at him in a developmental project, and I was hoping that I could have developed him to be a star quarterback. And that just didn't work. Not at all.
No, and I think it's fair to say that this was a really interesting. I think we had a discussion on this because at the time the Bengals, the quarterbacking situation was pretty atrocious, to be honest with you, and you were sort of taking flyers on guys who realistically wouldn't have made a league slot in most teams, and on the idea being that they've got some attributes that are already good enough probably to be a starter and in some teams, but maybe didn't have the position skill. And I think this really highlighted one of the challenges that we had as a league moving from 21 to 22 was that the position skill needs to develop, but we don't necessarily want everyone being at 99, 100, early on. And Stephen Morris was one of the interesting cases because you're sort of tracking it so closely on a week by week basis, and we were kind of seeing no progress, which kind of kicked off the further analysis that we did as a league to sort of understand. Well, is player position skill actually changing? Is it changing in the manner that we want it to? And it wasn't. So it's meant we had a change going into 22 for how the league and training and development kind of works. But I guess interesting point on Steve Morris. But that was one of the challenges. I mean, in terms of anything else that you sort of found and sort of thought about, maybe on the coaching side as well. Is there anything you sort of looking back, recognised as well alongside sort of those quarterback challenges that you had with the Bengals?
Well, I mean, one of the things that frustrated me with the Bengals that season, and I think much of it was because I never really got the offense working that season, was that I was hoping, like I said, that my defense, I had tried to build it up. And one of the hallmarks, if you would, of my team is I will always have 5 corners. To me, the corner position is a critical need position. And I think that and the linebackers are probably my 2 biggest areas that I really worry about in terms of developing the team. And so when it came to that, I was kind of disappointed in terms of what happened in terms of the development there and the defense there. But I think that a lot of the losses that I took was more of a function of my offense not working. So the defense, while it might have performed better if the offense had held its end, I will never be able to prove the theory because, I can't replay the season. But if I had, continued in the route that I was, I think that it may have been a better season if I had God, who was it that was quarterbacking my team in the previous year? Do you remember? Derek Anderson, right? That's what it was. It was Derek Anderson. If Anderson had been quarterbacking that season, I think it might have gone different.
Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting one, and then I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, but you kind of moved on from Anderson in sort of the off season going into this year. And you sort of had the Bengals for a little bit of time at the beginning of the year. Take us through sort of the thought process there. So obviously you sort of had a great start in terms of your career in the CSFL. You went 8-8, and everything was sort of looking in great shape. Then went 6-9, and we talked a little bit about maybe some of the struggles around the quarterback position in particular. And coming into this season, I know you had some great hope that the Bengals were probably in a great position to be a playoff team this year. Talk us through what kind of gave you that assurances. Was it maybe on the personnel side, the coaching side, you'd learnt a few things? what sort of made you think that the team could make that transition, and you could make that step up in the league?
First of all, I learned obviously from the 6-9 season that the quarterback position is somewhat critical, and so I made it a priority to try and get a decent quarterback. Um, Unfortunately, that didn't work out for me very well in free agency, and it didn't work out in the draft because the top three quarterbacks were all drafted in the top three spots. So I didn't succeed there either. Um, and I had a roster that I was okay with. I mean, I had gotten Kenneth Kolb out of free agency at the very, very end of free agency. And I says, you know what? He's going to be, he's going to be a tolerable quarterback. He's going to be someone that's like um, Derek Anderson. He's going to get me through. And I felt like, I've always done very well with my defense. The defenses have kind of been my comfort zone, if you would. Um, and I feel like that, when I looked at that, I was going to do my defensive thing. I was going to hold people close. I wasn't going to score a billion points. But if I could have someone who was steady, and Kolb looks steady, I was going to be able to get to the playoffs, because I feel like when I'm coaching, I can pretty much game plan to game plan match anybody. And I think that, I've oftentimes proven that just, being the underdog so many times on, uh, but the team was a mystery to me sometimes. I mean, because games that I thought I should win, I mean, the one that really set me off is I played the Cleveland Browns in, I think it was week 3 or 4, and there was no way in my mind the Browns were going to beat me, and as the Bengals. And then I lost. And I lost by like 6 points in the last second or whatever. I don't know.
Yes, so let me give you. It was week 5, and you lost by 6. The
Yeah,
Browns put up 17 points in the fourth quarter as a comeback to
right.
win that game. Before you sort of talk about that, you talked about Kolb, but obviously prior to that we had the Griffin trade. So maybe talk us through that, because Kolb only really lasted a couple, 2 or 3 games for you in the end as a starter, and then you kind of decided to pull the trigger on a guy who's not necessarily lived up to the hype, it's fair to say, in the CSFL.
Yes, RG3. I actually picked up RG3 and started using him in game 1. I picked him up just after free agency had ended. Zach had come out with um, his annual, this is where the teams place, and uh, I looked at that, and he's like, yeah, I don't know that Colb's going to carry through the Bengals, and I looked at it, and I was like, you think I don't know this? And he had, I'm just frustrated because, like I said, I've done everything I could to find a quarterback, and it wasn't working because I guess I played too well again, and just it was well enough to do this, and free agency wasn't working out for me very well. I had gotten Kolb at the last second, and it was a mess. It was just the quarterback situation I was depressed about.
Yeah, no, it's
And
just it's a tough position to fill anyway. I think it's probably worth just adding something in there, Stuart. Really, is along the lines of, you mentioned the draft had 3 top quarterbacks. They went in the top 3. The Bengals weren't in the top 3 of the draft. You then obviously had, I think, the likes of, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Big Ben, Roethlisberger was in free agency. I'm trying
yeah,
to think. I think maybe there was a couple of other noticeable quarterbacks in free agency. I think maybe Palmer was still in free agency. He was still around and still doing very well. So there was opportunities there, but the dice didn't fall your way, basically, which I guess resulted in this decision here with Griffin.
yeah, and so I looked at it, and I sat there, and um I was frustrated because I knew the quarterback situation had to change. And my defense, like I said, I was very happy with where my defense was. I had planned it very well, I thought. And I put it in a situation where, I thought was going to be, a decent situation. But I was still missing something dynamic on offense. And I knew it. I mean, McFadden was my entire offense. I mean, I just let him run over everybody, but I still didn't have anyone who could deliver the ball. And Zach pointed out what everyone knew is, well, if we ever get the Bengals to even get an average offense, they're going to be deadly. And I had built up, that situation. One of the trades that I really, really liked back in 15 was getting KIRKPATRICK on the corner. He had a very, very poor hand skill, but his speed and his agility was very good. And I just kept building up and training his hands somehow. And I just played him as a nickel. And he really worked well for me there. And I kept playing him there, and he kept improving there, and all the gameplay. So this is one of the players I had success with in terms of building, his position skill and everything else. So he was someone I was really proud of having and developing. But oh my God, Robert Griffin. One of the things Zach said was, "Well, RG3 is still available." And I don't know if I had looked at it or I looked at RG3 price, and the price was so high. And I was like, well, do I take a season with Kolb and see what happens with RG3 down the line? Or do I take the chance on RG3 now and even though he's priced higher than I'd like? And ultimately I decided, you know what? It's time to make a move. And my secondary was very strong, and so I'd taken Chris Conte, who had I think he had a year or two left, but he was on the older side. Also had a or no, Chris Conte he was never going to play for me. That's what it was. I had I had someone else at free safety. Who was it? I want to say, was it Christian Scott that I had? But I had somebody, and I was like, okay, this team is just a quarterback away, so let's sacrifice free safety a little bit. And so I got Chris Conte and Griffin for Earl Thomas. That's who it was. I traded Earl Thomas, who had an overinflated contract and wasn't going to play as a starter, or if he was, it was just not another year. And I traded him for and I lost I'd already stocked up a lot of draft picks, and I traded a second round draft pick along with Earl Thomas and got RG3. So there I had a team now with, I think it was 5 or 6 quarterbacks on the team, which was more than I wanted. But again, I felt like I was a quarterback away, and maybe RG3 was the answer.
Yeah, and then I guess RG3 came in, and the team started to show some signs of improvement and making sort of that forward progress. And then I guess got to a point in the season where you kind of decided to move across to take the LA Rams. And so I'd be interested maybe if you just talk a little bit about how you felt the Bengals were sort of in a good position to possibly move on and maybe take another challenging situation in the Rams.
Well, I didn't want to leave the Bengals. I really didn't want to leave the Bengals. I had been asked to take the Rams, I think it was 2 weeks prior. And I was like, yeah, no, I've already gone through that rebuilding thing. I just don't want to do it again. And I've put so much work into the Bengals, and I feel like I'm so close. And, I don't know how RG, I don't even think I had RG3 when that, initial offer came forward. And I was like, I'm just going to stick it out with the Bengals. And then the Browns game happened. And the Browns game, at that point, I felt like I didn't know this game because I had done everything, and I mean everything possible. I had a 16, 17 point lead, and then lost the game by 6 in the last quarter. And I just sat there. I'm like, I don't know how to play any better. I just don't. And that frustration, at that point, I was like, fine, the Rams are free. I'll take the Rams. Because I saw the next game I had was going to be against Toasty in Pittsburgh, and I was like, I was like, I'm not sure I have the wherewithal to ramp up for that game. And I was like, the NFC West is pretty weak. Um, I can take a look at it and maybe I can rebuild. Maybe I did something wrong with the Bengals that I can't figure out, but I could figure it out with a Rams team that's going to have about 75 million available for the next season. And I was like, that's pretty attractive. The team itself, though, was in crap shape. I mean, I think it was possibly worse than when I took over the Bengals.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Rams are in an interesting situation, and we'll talk about them in a little bit. But I guess you left the Bengals. I think what you're saying is, it's fair to say, is that the Cleveland Browns basically forced you to move to the Bengals. That was the deciding factor, which is really interesting to hear, and just shows how competitive the league is. And sometimes you do get results that just don't make sense, or you're not sure why it doesn't fit, and that can be really frustrating at times. But yeah, so you obviously decided to move across to the Rams, who I think at the time had lost all of their games at that point. I think maybe they'd won the week 4 against the Cardinals when
Yeah,
you
they
took over.
won week 4.
Yeah, so they were 1-3 at the time. You said they've obviously got cap room in the summer, and it was more about thinking about the next off season. And well, I've got the schedule up here on the on the thing, and then something just miraculous happened with this Rams team. And wow, I mean, what a run! Just talk us through your initial reaction, what things you maybe tweaked, and then I guess the run itself, and how you kind of built towards that.
Well, at that point, it was like, well, I'm like, if I'm going to have a losing season, I'm going to go and, I'm going to take a look at this and I am going to try and make this team into the shape that I want it to be in. Especially, like I said, with 75 million at the time that I took it over, I wanted to take a look at this team and see, okay, I'm building this team so that it can win next year, not 2-3 years from now, next year. And I looked at the situation, and I've got Bridgewater as a quarterback who looked miserable to me. I've got really very little of anything. I mean, I had some speed guys. I had C.J. Anderson who looked okay. But not certainly no Darren McFadden. My offensive line was weak. My tight ends were probably, I have Jermichael Finley and Kelsey who, look very good. So I was happy there. My wide receivers weren't bad. I had Edelman, but Jernigan was out there too. But, I wish he had a little bit more agility. But, again, DENARD Robinson, who, Michigan guy, so I got to like him. But still not quite where he is. But he had a number 1 and number 2 receiver. So I was like, okay, that's not bad. My corners were very good, or at least, average plus. A little bit more speed would have been nice. But again, I had Dahl, and who looks nice with an 81 speed, agility is 77, but he's got hands at 61, which for corners not it's pretty decent. Ray Wilson was a 78 speed. So again, a lot of folks that I thought were developable, but there was no one that was really outstanding, and the team just looked bereft of any real talent. So it was kind of like, okay, I've got average minus talent, average minus definitely for this league. How do we build that up? And so that was the first thing that I had to look at when I took over the team.
Yeah, and then obviously you had your first game against the 49ers, who I think at this point were probably thinking they were going to be a playoff team with Roethlisberger, been brought in free agency, and a couple of other big names that had come into that team. You managed to squeak out a 4-point win there. You then went on, obviously, beat the Seahawks, the Steelers, the Falcons, the Eagles,
Oh,
and then the Seahawks again.
yeah, the Seahawks was actually the first game I played. So
Okay.
the computer had won 2 games in a row.
So
I
you
didn't
won.
beat
So your first game you won 38-6 against the Seahawks, and then you went to
correct.
Pittsburgh and beat Toasty in a crazy 7-6 game, defensive
And so
juggernaut
that
game.
meant I beat Toasty 2 weeks straight because I put in the game plan for the Bengals and left it there. And it went through, and so I beat Toasty as the Bengals, not playing the Bengals. And then I beat the Toasty the following week. Sorry, Toasty.
Yeah, so you won those 2 games. I guess you come in and thinking, oh, it's probably going to be a 2-14 season. It's a difficult one. And then it kind of mothballed into a win and a win and a win and a win and a win. And all of a sudden, the Rams were sitting comfortably top of the division. I guess,
Yeah,
what was your
we won
reaction to
8 in a
that?
row. I mean, 8 in a row, 9 in a row, something like that.
Yeah, a franchise record, basically. So, I guess, what's your reaction to that when you go from a position thinking, oh, I'll just sort it all out in the off season, to, oh my goodness me, we're actually going to be a playoff team this year.
I was kind of laughing. I mean, I figured I by the time I beat the Seahawks and I beat the 49ers again, I looked at it and I'm like, well, I'm going to be a 6-10 playoff team or 6-11 or whatever it was. I really just was like expecting to get completely blown out the rest of the way, and I'm just keep winning and winning and winning. And I think I figured out the key somewhere early on with Bridgewater. I didn't do any testing for the Rams this season. Um, Part of that was because I really had no hope, and I was like, okay, let's just fiddle around, have fun, try and build this team up. And so, initially the first thing I was doing was, I was claiming people off practice squads, and they were immediately second string players for this team. I was scoping the free agency and seeing if there was anyone left there. I made a minor trade here and there just to try and get anything. I mean, just anything, any sign of life for this team. And almost everything worked. I mean, the game plan that I created, I looked at the team and the coaches, were West Coast type offense, and with Bridgewater's accuracy, that kind of fit really well. Um, so instead of a game where I might be, say, using a balanced attack in terms of my passing, where I balance the receivers. Um, I key on doing things that were smaller, that were more within Bridgewater's arm range, and it just worked. Everything worked.
Yeah, no, I've got Bridgewater's analysis page up on the video here, and no deep balls basically. Pretty much everything is either short or medium, and the majority of it is to the left hand side, either short or medium, and the accuracy numbers are just electric. I mean, his medium right is the worst at 63%, and then he's got 71% at short left, and we know. I go back to Bridgewater's just profile here. We know the accuracy rating of him is great, but maybe the arm is probably not at league standard. And you obviously built that style around the type of quarterback you have, and I think that's a real key thing to get across to people. Is 2 things you've mentioned there. One is the idea of building around the quarterback you've kind of got, and don't necessarily map a game plan to a quarterback. And then also you said about the practice squads and the trades and bringing in those second string players wherever you could, and I think that type of micromanagement is so essential that could probably take a team like the Rams from being a bottom team to maybe starting the fantastic run that you had. Is just building up that depth.
And that's really it. I mean, I made like I said, I made a lot of, as you said, micro moves. Um, you know, for example, and this was important for the last game of the year. I picked up Blake Bortles even at the end of the year as a quarterback. I had at the beginning of the season, I had Bridgewater and I had Tyrod Taylor as my quarterbacks. That was it. I don't think I think I even picked up Tyrod Taylor off the if I recall, off the waiver wire or free agency. I had who was the QB? I had Clancy. That's right. I had Joe Clancy as my quarterback backup. So I had nobody, and I was just trying to improve even that little depth and those little moves of Bortles and getting Tyrod Taylor off free agency gave me, some depth. And so my quarterback, I was like, Tyrod Taylor was what, 170,000 a year. Blake Bortles, Clancy was, like 600 or 700,000, I think, for 1 year. I don't remember exactly what his contract was. It says it looks like 2 million or something, but he was on a 1 year contract, and I was like, he's useless. And I ended up Blake Bortles. He may never be a starter for me, but he's got very similar abilities to Bridgewater. You got the um, high accuracy, if you would. Again, not as high. His accuracy is 74, but his arm strength is the same, 76. Not as intelligent. Clear backup quarterback. But in a pinch, he might win me a game. I mean, even in the game that I played against Detroit with Bortles starting, he threw 3 touchdown passes in the same offense that Bridgewater did.
Yeah, and I think that's key is that if you are bringing in players and you do have a certain style that you want to play, if you haven't mapped, necessarily to a certain quarterback and you're trying to bring in those types of players, then build around whatever you've got that's working. And it was obviously working with Bridgewater, so you needed someone who could step in and possibly take that position if, God forbid, Bridgewater did go down with an injury. I think that's really really interesting insight. And obviously those types of moves can free up cap for you as well as you think about it, and you can turn one player into 3 or 4 who can probably fill more roles that you maybe need, etc. And it's great to sort of give that insight, I think, to newer GMs if they're watching this, is to, those kind of things on the surface are not the big flashy trades, but they're the things that kind of do turn a team around, and quite quickly with the Rams that you've done here. So you've got to the point at the end of the season, you obviously had such a fantastic run. You ended up in the playoffs with winning the division, getting to the point where you're 10-6, looking in great shape. You got to the playoffs, and then I'm just going to get the bracket up now here. And then you got to the point where you then got bumped out by the Chicago Bears, who on paper probably have a bit more talent than you do. At this point, but I mean, still a fantastic run. I mean, you've got to be feeling really happy with that achievement, winning Coach of the Year off the back of this amazing Rams run. I guess now you've sort of had a week or so to kind of digest where you finished off the season. What's your thoughts now, and kind of going into the off season, and how are you going to try and tackle that with the Rams next year?
Well, one of the big problems I have is, at least in my brain, is I've done so well with Bridgewater. Do I want to get a quarterback that's more, if you would, traditional to the CSFL? I mean, more. I mean, Bridgewater's got good intelligence and good accuracy, but his arm stinks. As a starting quarterback, do I want to get someone in there that is, more of a, has got a bigger arm or offers me an alternative? I haven't really decided that yet. One of the things I know is I'm losing basically my entire secondary this year. I couldn't renew contracts of people I wanted to renew, or the prices were too high and I wasn't willing to pay it. So that's going to be an area of concern. I'm still not very happy with my offensive line. I'd like it to be beefier, but in the offense I've been running right now, the offensive line is not as critical. So I just need a second or two for Bridgewater to do his thing. So there's that. Um, And yeah, I mean, those are the kinds of things that are running through my brain. I really am annoyed that both times I lost to the Bears, it was they were close games, and I just couldn't quite do it. And I know that's a function not of the game plan, but of basically the talent I have around on the team. I don't think immediately I'm going to have that talent for the Rams because, like I said, I lost a number of the key players I relied on defense. So I've got to replace that if I can. If I can, then it's going to be again. I'm going to be crawling around trying to find the small deals because I generally I don't think you ever really see me make big flashy deals. I mean, the biggest one that I made that was flashy was the RG3 deal. Um, but for the most part, I try to you know develop through the draft and I try to develop through free agency so that I can get some steals here and there and hope that they develop correctly.
Yeah, so just it's really interesting to hear about what you think sorts out for the off season. It sounds like you've got a couple of undecided things there to kind of think about, and possibly some big positional needs to kind of change and think about. I guess bringing that to a sort of conclusion, it's been a fantastic season for the Rams. I guess what would be great to hear sort of now would be looking back on your career in the CSFL to date and your sort of experience with using Draft Day Sports Pro Football and bringing that along. I guess what would be the kind of key things that you would say to someone who's new, maybe joining the league, or someone who's been in the league for a while but maybe not necessarily had the type of results that they were anticipating? What were sort of things that you would talk about there? I mean, you talked about some of the minor moves and some of the training and development and bringing players and developing them, and second, but building up that depth of the team. I guess if you've got sort of three things that you would sort of say to a new GM or one that's looking to improve, how would you what are the big ones that you would that stand out for you that looking back you would tell yourself really if you joined at the league now?
Well, first of all, I think it's critical to have the information. Don't assume that you know everything. I will tell you, I made a great deal of assumptions coming into the league, even after reading everything I did, and then just basically watching, listening, learning, and talking to people, seeing what works and what doesn't work was probably the biggest thing that I'm glad I listened to most of it. There was some trial and error, obviously, but that was probably the number one thing for me was to be open to learning. And in terms of number two, I think this is my lesson from the taking over the Rams. I mean, the team that I had is not anything special. I mean, if you look around, there are much, much better teams, and I would probably say that the team in strength is probably in the bottom third. I mean, in terms of overall ratings. Don't get caught up on the overalls and do what your team does best. As you saw with Bridgewater, I'm not throwing deep. That's not happening with Bridgewater. He doesn't have the arm strength for it on a regular basis. So concentrate on what your team does best. And number three, and this is something I learned on my own, look at what the opponent does best, and shut it down. Um, one of the things that I looked at, for example, I don't know if I should give away the secret on the Ravens, but one of the things that I look at the Ravens is how do you shut down that attack? And there are certain key plays that I do that is just for the Ravens. My game plan for the Ravens is not the same game plan as I have for Pittsburgh, is not the same game plan that I have for Detroit or even Seattle. Every week, I reevaluate the team. I reevaluate what I do well, what my opponent does well, and alter the game plan based on that. Sometimes I get fooled, like when Detroit decided to play a different running back than the one I keyed on. Not looking at you.
Uh, yeah, we
But
gave you a different
every
look. I'll admit that.
I bet. But um, Keon Mendenhall, and guess what hits me? Anyways, but every week, I do something different, trying to anticipate what my opponents are going to do, so that I could get the best and most out of my team, as opposed to what it might be for another team. So, I mean, that game planning, at least in my opinion, is so critical to every week. Relying on just one game plan isn't going to work.
I can completely agree. I think that's three fantastic top tips to anyone who's made it to the end of this video and is interested to peer into the mind of the coach of the year in the league. Is certainly fantastic to end on that note. Stuart, it's been really interesting to hear how you tackled the Bengals and tackled kind of the Sim League in general, and how the Rams have gone on this miraculous run at the end of the season here. I wish you the absolute best this off-season in bringing a bit more talent to that Rams team to hopefully take the next step from being a division winner to possibly being a contender. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us, and I'm sure we will be back in the future to talk a little bit more about the changes that you make to the Rams, and who knows, maybe some further success on that team as well.
Well, I certainly hope that we could continue the path we're on. I'm concerned it might be another year after this one, but then again, I outperformed my expectations for the Rams this year, so we'll see.